everybody. Welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com.
Happy Wednesday morning and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. This is number 147 and today is Wednesday, November 2nd, 2016. I'm Erik here with AJ in Medellin, Colombia. Today we've got a bunch of news and updates from around the points and miles world, including a sudden devaluation by Delta, some changes to the Aeroplan fee structure, and some other kind of interesting and cool news from around the travel world, in particular, some interesting new routes that we're going to jump into. Today's core content, we're going to dive into a featured destination, specifically Sao Paulo, which is a place that AJ and I have spent a ton of time. I think we've probably got about 10 or 15 trips to Sao Paulo combined. And AJ just returned from a short trip to Sao Paulo, so we've got some observations and tips to cover. We definitely are not complete experts on Sao Paulo. It's a huge city, but that's one of the benefits. We know a couple of neighborhoods really well, and so we wanted to share some of our favorite things and hopefully help some of you guys that may have Sao Paulo or Brazil in general on your travel itinerary coming up, get even more out of the experience. So show notes for today's episode are going to be at abroaders.com/SP for Sao Paulo. And let's jump into some news and updates. All right, so this week we've got India in the news for good reason and bad reason. First of all, we've got a unannounced award chart change for Delta Sky Miles, and that doesn't even really mean anything anymore
because they don't have an award chart.
They don't publish it. So, however, we've got lots of folks that are keeping close tabs on what the prices are doing, and it looks like the one-way business class rate for Delta Sky Miles has gone up from 70,000 points to 97,500 points. So pretty substantial. That's like almost a 40% increase in the cost of a one-way ticket between the US and India. So that's a little bit of a bummer. The silver lining is that economy flights have stayed steady at 40,000. So they haven't bumped that up at the moment. And India is kind of one of those places that's a little bit trickier to get to.
Yeah, one of the more difficult award destinations.
Yep. It's not not really on the way, at least from the US. I mean, it's probably a much easier award destination from Asia and from
but from the US, it's the destination. It's not just,
exactly.
Like you said, it's not on the way to stuff.
So, it's a little bit more expensive, but I guess the plus thing on this side is that it might be possible to still book a Delta flight to, say, Europe, pay 62,000 miles, and get that Saver Award there, and potentially get another Saver Award either in business or economy onward to India for roughly the same price. So although it's a bummer, like 70 was a really good rate to get direct to India. If you're looking to piece a couple of awards together and maybe have a stop somewhere else interesting along the way, might not be such a big deal. Second item up is just sort of something that I found really interesting.
This is very fascinating.
Yeah, so Air India has now broken the record for the longest flight in terms of distance traveled with a new change in the way that they're operating their flight.
Yeah, so it is now the longest flight, not because they are going somewhere further away, but they're taking a different route.
Yeah, exactly. So they actually just changed the flight distance. And the thing that amazes me the most is that they essentially tacked on an extra 1,800 miles compared to the direct route. And so for perspective, the shortest route, this is a flight between Delhi and San Francisco. And so the shortest route goes right over the top, basically. So you're going to fly directly north from Delhi, and you're going to come down over the Arctic Circle and end up in San Francisco. And what they did is they shifted it to fly across the Pacific, to basically just fly east, and it shaved almost 2 hours off the travel time because of the jet stream.
Yeah.
So kind of interesting. I mean, to me, like if I'm going to go for like a first class long haul flight, I want the one that actually takes the most time, not necessarily covers the most distance. But I just thought it was amazing the amount of change that you can add almost 2,000 miles on and take 2 hours less to get there.
It's really unconventional, but I mean, I'm surprised that they didn't maybe look at it before, because the airlines are very sophisticated in the way that they calculate their costs and the routing and everything. I mean, you even consider, airlines calculate at, which cruising altitude they're going to be using less fuel. It takes X amount of fuel
Speaking
to get
of
up
this new route, take a guess at how many pounds of fuel they saved.
Oh, jeez. So now they got the jet stream. I don't even know how many pounds they would use. I mean, an extra 5,000 pounds. I don't know.
26,000 pounds.
They're saving
of fuel
26.
13 tons of fuel.
Jeez.
Incredible.
Wow, that's remarkable.
It's amazing. Next up, we have a program rules change with Aeroplan that is not good news. This is related to the change fees for an award ticket. So as things currently stand, and we did get a little bit of advance notice, so there's some good news here. As things currently stand, it costs 90 Canadian dollars to change or cancel and redeposit a flight. Flat fee, if you decide you can't fly, you want to change your dates, any of those things, you just pay a 90 Canadian dollars, 68 US, and you can change and redeposit those points. And you can do it up to 2 hours before departure. So you've got a really nice window. If you find out last minute you can't take a trip, you're not going to be out that much money. So this policy that's currently in effect is going to stay in effect for all tickets that are booked through December 5th. So if you book a ticket for next year, say, May of 2017, but you book it on the 5th of December, you're subject to these change rules. They're going to stay in effect for tickets booked now.
Right.
However, the change kicks in on December 6th, and it's pretty nasty. The worst part of the rule is that any refunds have to be 22 days before departure. So if you're inside of 22 days, you're effectively going to have to pay double change fees to pay an extra change fee before paying a redeposit.
This whole thing is like a triple whammy. They're restricting on what you can do with the time frame, and they're also charging you more money. And the scenario you just said, you're going to have to pay money to change a flight in order to get a refund, because you can't get a refund inside of 21 days.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with not the worst case scenario. The new scenario, let's say you're still more than 22 days out on your flight. Now the change fee is going to be 100 Canadian. So again, about $68, about $75.
Yep.
But it's for each direction of travel. So a round trip is now going to cost you $150 to change your dates. Now, the bad part is that the redeposit fee is 150 Canadian dollars, so just over 100 US.
Yeah, 115, 110 bucks.
Okay, so if you want to refund your ticket and you're further out than 22 days, that's all you're going to pay is the 150 Canadian. However, if you're inside of 22 days, that means you've got to change your ticket first, find a flight that's available to rebook that is more than 22 days out, pay the fee, and then pay the cancellation fee, which now you're allowed to do because it's more than 22 days out.
Here's a question. Out of all the programs, off the top of your head, does anyone else do anything remotely close to this?
No, but Air Canada's been the cheapest change that's out there besides Singapore. Singapore charges like 30 Singapore dollars to change your flight, which I'm thinking about doing coming up for one of mine. But Aeroplan's way behind. Most of the other airlines are going to charge about $200 to cancel and redeposit. And so this is more or less bringing things on par.
Yeah, but I mean,
worst case scenario, you're out about $200.
What would be the typical windows? Let's say with like Delta, American, or United, how much time do you have to refund your miles?
Usually within a couple of days of departure, you're still okay. I think Delta, it depends also sometimes with partner airlines. So it's easier for an airline to change their own tickets. Mm-hmm. And so the one thing you want to watch out for is if you're within a certain number of days of departure, sometimes with partner awards, say you use American Airlines to book on Etihad, you might not be able to change ticket last minute.
Man, this whole thing made me think of something really important. If you book one of these tickets after December 5th, where you could be looking at some serious fees to change things, it's going to be in your benefit to keep tabs on your flight, because if something changes with your flight, then you could cry foul and say, hey, I booked the flight for 2, I can't do 3 because I got this thing, so you got to give me.
Yeah. So typically any schedule change of more than an hour gives you room. I've gotten away with schedule changes as low as 25 or 30 minutes and being able to say that, my connection time was not going to work. Obviously, like they know what your actual flight schedule is. So You can't make up if you have a 4-hour layover that the 20-minute delay is going to hurt you.
But you could make up that you have a just non-negotiable lunch with Aunt Susie, and you only see her once a year, so you got to be there.
You got to be there. She's going to be talking about it at Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the other family holidays.
And you know how families are.
That's true. So I guess the key takeaway here is definitely, yes, if you monitor those flights and any change. And the other good one is outside of schedule changes, sometimes for equipment changes. Mm-hmm. If you were originally flying on a 777 and now you're going to be flying on a A330 and the business class product changed or something like that, it doesn't have to be super elaborate. The key thing to success here, I think, is being willing to give it a few tries, hang up and call back and find an agent that's having a nice day and willing to work with you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we've got a bunch of new routes that came out recently. Quite a few different airlines are shifting up their flight plans and basically reallocating aircraft that were on routes that weren't getting very high load factors, weren't really filling up the seats, and have made some changes. So I wanted to cover a couple of them that I think are potentially very useful new routes. One of the best things about new routes is that often when a route first opens up, there's going to be some award availability at the very beginning.
Oh, that's like what we saw with Delta from to the other airport in Japan.
Yes,
in Tokyo.
to Haneda in Tokyo, there was a bunch of availability. I think there's still some good availability on the Haneda route. And so most of these have been relatively recent announcements. I think the one that I'm most excited about is the direct flight from San Francisco to Singapore on Singapore Airlines. It's going to be the longest nonstop service in the world at the time that it opens up. Wow. So it's going to overtake, I believe, I want to say somewhere in the Middle East to Auckland.
Yep, I think so.
It's currently, I think it's an Emirates flight. But yeah, so Singapore is a Star Alliance airline. You're going to get probably the best deals using Singapore miles. Number one, they have better availability for their own KrisFlyer members. And again, Singapore is one of the couple currencies, along with Flying Blue from Air France, that's partners with all four. They're friends with everybody. So it's really easy if you have transferable points to get Singapore miles and be able to book that route. The second one I wanted to mention is a new route from Hong Kong to Tel Aviv on Cathay Pacific. And this is going to be on the new A350. And they are taking a bunch of deliveries of this aircraft. There's an interesting article from 1 Mile at a Time that talks about this route. And Israel's kind of hard to get to. There's a few different hacks. It's not that far of a connection from Europe, but availability to Israel tends to be relatively low, relatively limited. And so one of the things that this opens up is potentially being able to book a trip from the U.S. to Israel via Asia. And although at the moment there aren't any programs that I can think of that let you do that all on a single award ticket, it is possible to potentially combine a couple of different awards and get a pretty cool trip where you're making a stop in Hong Kong for a few days or a week and then continuing on to Tel Aviv. I think the thing that strikes me about this is I've done Europe to Asia a couple of times, and typically an economy flight from Europe to Asia is roughly 30,000 miles. I did Budapest to Bangkok, and that came out on British Airways to almost 30,000 miles. The American ticket, I believe, was going to be 32.5. And so Tel Aviv, most airlines include Tel Aviv with the Middle East instead of with Europe. And so the pricing is really advantageous here. With Alaska mileage plan, you're looking at a one-way business class from Tel Aviv to Hong Kong or vice versa. Is going to cost you 30,000 miles. The one downside with Alaska is you can't add on other flights after Hong Kong on partners without increasing the award ticket. But on American, you can. And the pricing is not that much worse. It's only 40,000 miles for business class on American.
It's a really good deal.
Yeah, and I mean, I haven't been on an A350, but I bet you this new plane has great business class product, and obviously the soft product with Cathay, the food, the service.
Your first class experience with Cathay, which plane was that you were flying?
777.
777. Okay.
Yep. So that was Chicago to Hong Kong direct. It was about a 13-hour flight, maybe 14 hours.
I did business on the 777, so I can imagine how nice first class was, because the business class was everything I could
flashy.
Want more.
It's quite nice. Definitely a spot where it makes some sense. The one drawback on this, I mean, it's a great price at 30,000 Alaska miles. That's almost a reason I would go visit Tel Aviv just to have that experience. It's about a 10-hour flight. So it's not the longest business class flight you could book, but for the price, pretty good deal.
30,000 for a great business class on a 10-hour flight? Man, that's all day long. That's great stuff.
Pretty awesome.
I mean, when you consider that flying from Detroit to Paris is 30,000 Delta Sky Miles, and that's a 7 hour flight, I think.
Yeah, if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, and you find absolute saver level in economy.
Yeah.
Okay, so next up on our list of new routes is Los Angeles to Santiago, Chile. And this one is cool to me because it's on LATAM. So it's an airline. Most of the flights that I take to South America are either on American, Delta, or United. There's a couple of cool routes out of LAX. The one I really want to fly is Korean Airlines' Fifth Freedom route from LA to Sao Paulo, which has been going for a long time. So this gives another direct connection to a major Latin American capital. I studied abroad in Santiago, not a city I would like to say live in again, but a very cool place to visit.
Worth seeing.
A lot of cool stuff nearby. The area around Santiago is very cool. And also only like a 6-hour bus ride across the Andes to head over to Mendoza, which is another very cool place.
Wine country.
So for this flight, again, I think this is a really good candidate to pick up business class awards and also should have plenty of economy.
Do we know which plane this is?
So this is going to be operated on a 787.
So the new guy.
Yep. So it's a brand new aircraft. And it was interesting that they used to fly this route, I think, somewhere in the past on a different aircraft. And the 787 is a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient, a couple of hours of travel time. So just for reference, this is a 3x per week schedule, so it's not going to be a daily availability, but if it fits in with your schedule, it could be a really good option to get from the West Coast off
South
to
America.
South America. Best options for booking, because it's direct flight, British Airways is going to be a good option, especially in economy. Business class on partner airlines typically is 3x economy, so it's probably not so good there. But you've got the option of using American miles, and you're going to have very low taxes and fees, probably in the $30 to $50.
Man, I would imagine that's a really nice flight, because I flew from Sao Paulo to Bogota on their 757, and I gave the business class a peek, and it looked like a little bit dated, but it looked pretty nice. So I can only imagine the 787 is like one of the latest and greatest, and so that's probably pretty sweet.
Definitely excited to potentially give that one a try. Next up, we've got Southwest has just opened up their schedule for flights from Fort Lauderdale to Cuba. They've got Verdadero and Havana, and this one, super short flight, so this is not any kind of long haul, but lots of folks have Southwest points. Companion Pass is an option if you've got that, to use this for a cheap flight to Cuba, and that guy just opened up, I think, pretty recently.
Yeah, maybe last week.
No, actually, it's coming up in the near future, so this is going to be November 13th.
Oh, okay, so they must have announced it.
Yep.
It's going to be interesting to see what Southwest continues to do, because I know they've alluded to South American plans. Colombia.
I hope
Brazil.
so, man. That would be just cherry on top to have them and JetBlue having an expanding route network in Latin America. Next up, also at Fort Lauderdale, is Emirates is now going to be flying between Fort Lauderdale and Dubai, which is really a strange one. This one starts December 15th. And so I think this is a pretty interesting operation. I think the logic behind this one is that Emirates has, I believe, a code share agreement with JetBlue. And so part of the motivation behind this route is to connect to their domestic partner, JetBlue, for onward travel within the United States. So this is not your O&D traffic route, which is origin and destination, people that actually want to go to the city.
Right.
I think it's more about connecting traffic from feeder cities all over the U.S. through JetBlue's route network, arriving at Fort Lauderdale and then taking that Emirates flight out to Dubai.
Interesting.
All right, well, that wraps it up for new flights, I believe. There's probably a few that we missed, but those are the big ones and definitely the ones worth taking a look at for mileage transportation. Okay, so we've got a couple of other kind of interesting news stories that I wanted to get to at least quickly. The first one is that the governor of New York has just signed a bill imposing some massive fines on homeowners or apartment owners in the city that rent out their place on Airbnb. Fines up to $7,500. So talking about a massive fine. And it'll be really interesting to see how this shakes out. Now, obviously, Airbnb is not one of those companies in financial trouble that needs any help to hire good lawyers and go to bat against this thing. But for the time being, this is a pretty tough law.
It's massive. And the massive thing is New York, I don't know the stats, but I would imagine New York is at the very least a top 5 Airbnb market in the world. And when you consider Airbnb has penetrated pretty much the entire globe as far as where they've got, we're talking about thousands of people. There's thousands of hosts in New York that were, if not more, were making some of them, probably all of their living on this, and now they just got the rug.
Yeah, it really hurts to think that the hotels are still in a position where they've got the kind of power to be able to push something like this through legislatively. I would think that most of New York constituents really don't care that there's competition with the hotels. They really prefer having options, and nobody's stopping you from staying in a hotel. You just also have the option to rent out a place on Airbnb. So it'd be interesting to see what they do to go to bat. I know that Airbnb has proposed trying to compromise with the city and the hotel lobby to basically say, okay, well, what if we make sure that hosts are only allowed to rent one unit? So, they're not, basically creating their own little mini hotel chain within the city. And some other regulations that basically set things up to sort of more highly regulate, but not outlaw Airbnb entirely. But this is an ongoing story, so I guess we'll just have to check
a couple of the big tech players in the world are facing all sorts of interesting legal stuff between Airbnb and Uber. Mm-hmm. Really, really interesting stuff. And that bothers me that they did that with Airbnb. I mean, I'm okay with some regulation. There must be law and order, as Donald Trump would say it, not to support him by any means, but why? Why?
Yeah, very, very strange. The other piece of news actually involves Uber, but not a legal battle at this point. But Uber deployed drones to advertise their services in Mexico City. And I thought this was kind of cool. Just an interesting article. I can imagine that this is something that surprised motorists quite a bit. And basically the point of the advertising is that the traffic, just like we were talking about with Sao Paulo, is horrible in Mexico City. And so they basically had these little drones floating around over traffic jams, just basically saying, don't you wish you weren't stuck here right now? Try Uber Pool and let's get some cars off the road. Yeah. So pretty interesting. I think the thing that I found most interesting in the article was them talking about why this is probably not going to be an ongoing thing, more of a publicity sort of stunt for Uber, because they're talking about the prospects of doing this type of thing in the US and the amount of clearance that you have to get from the FAA to operate drones. Yep. There's all these restrictions, and you don't want any advertising signs falling on people's heads. But from the image that's in the post, we'll put a link in the show notes. It looks pretty harmless. They're little small drones. So
yeah. It's pretty funny.
And you don't have many people hopefully out running around on the highway.
Talking about traffic jams and stuff, that made me think of something I forgot about with Brazil and Waze. So the creator of Waze, or one of the founders of Waze, really wanted to help Brazilians engage in the product and take it to the next level. And they were having some issues with some of the routing. And like in Sao Paulo, you've got some less savory neighborhoods that maybe aren't the safest to drive through after night. So they recently solved that whole problem of not only mapping traffic and mapping things and integrating all these people together in the platform, but databasing which places would be red flag areas for the average citizen to drive through. So now in Brazil, Waze tells you when you're about to go through a dangerous neighborhood, or they'll tell you it is 10 minutes faster, but it's a warning, dangerous neighborhood, which is, I thought, really fascinating.
Interesting. Make your own choice there.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a few late breaking news items that AJ and I did not get to record together, but I wanted to make sure that we got these updates onto the podcast. So first up, we've got a buy points promotion from IHG, International Hotels Group. And this is not something that typically would be a promotion that everybody needs to jump on, but I wanted to mention it because if you buy more than 16,000 points, you get 100% bonus, so you're going to get double the number of points. And this is important because IHG just released their new list of Points Breaks hotels, which the bookings are starting October 31st, so this is already live. Points Breaks are hotel award nights that you can book for 5,000 points a night. So if you combine the Points Breaks with the 100% bonus on purchase points, you can actually buy 5,000 points, or enough for a Points Breaks night, for $29. So this could be a really good deal, but only if you've got IHG hotel stays coming up. We'll link in the show notes to both the promo to buy points with the 100% bonus and also to the list of Points Breaks hotels, so you can see if there's any of those coming up on your next trip. Next up, we've got an important award availability notice for British Airways search engine. So as you guys probably know if you've been listening for a while, Cathay Pacific is one of the best airlines out there in terms of opening up award space for their partners for flights that are close to departure. So typically business and first class seats, if Cathay hasn't sold all of them, they open up in the last few days before departure and can be booked with a whole bunch of their One World partners. The problem is that British Airways, for whatever reason right now, does not have access to those seats. So they're not showing those seats with the British Airways search, and they're also not able to book those seats. However, the seats are still there. So if you use British Airways to search for Cathay Pacific, be aware that those close to departure availabilities for seats in business and first class are not going to show up. You can still find them using the Qantas search engine. So that's the best place to look, is search using Qantas or with Award Nexus. And American Airlines can book these, and so can Qantas. So if you have AA miles, you are able to get a hold of these seats. And so you want to use Qantas to check for availability or Award Nexus, and then call AA to book. At least for the time being, you can no longer book those last minute seats for British Airways, even by calling. So it won't be a use for British Airways miles, but generally business and first class for long haul is not the best use of British Airways anyways. So it probably makes sense to use American. And you should also be aware that Alaska can book these seats as well. So if you've got Alaska mileage plan miles, that's a great way to go as well. While we're on the topic of availability, there is also great availability still open in business class on flights operated by EVA Airways. This is Taiwan's national carrier. They're based in Taipei, and their routes to the U.S., especially to North America in general, especially to U.S. gateways, are wide open, up to 4 seats in business class. Keep in mind, you can book these flights with most of their Star Alliance partners. So you want to be looking at United. 80,000 miles each way should be very low taxes and fees, and United is a transfer partner of Chase Ultimate Rewards. You can also book these seats through Aeroplan. That should be 75,000 each way between the US and Asia, or 77,500 to some parts of South Asia, depending on your final destination. A little bit higher taxes and fees there, so there's a little bit of a trade-off with a little more cash if you book through Aeroplan, and 5,000 fewer miles in comparison to United. And then last up, this is also bookable with Life Miles, which is Avianca's program. They're the newest transfer partner of Starwood Preferred Guests. So if you have SPG points, you can move those over to Life Miles. And you can also acquire Life Miles relatively cheaply. At least a few times a year, they have big mileage sales that bring the cost of each point down to around somewhere between 1.5 and 1.75 cents per mile. So if you don't have any points, buying Life Miles, if there's availability for the ticket you want, might be a way to get this business class ticket super cheap compared to buying retail. So again, that's EVA Air out of their Taipei hub to lots of destinations in North America. 3 to 4 business class seats on most flights. Check it out. And last but not least, a couple of quick mentions. Just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware. Citi has announced JetBlue as the newest transfer partner. Probably not a good move to move Citi points to JetBlue. Generally, you're going to be able to get the same value just using your Citi points to book through Citi's travel portal on JetBlue. And the advantage there is that you will also be able to earn miles on those flights. So it's nice to have a little extra flexibility, especially if you just need to top up a little bit for your next paid redemption. But this is less than a 1-to-1 ratio. I believe 1,000 Citi points gets you 800 JetBlue. So that's the same deal as American Express has at the moment, and just not super attractive. I think both I think both Citi and American Express points are more valuable elsewhere, but it's worth knowing that the option is there. The other piece of news is that American Airlines is launching premium economy as a class of service starting on April 2nd. So if you are looking for premium economy on American operated flights, the first date that you're going to be able to book those is April 2nd. We'll have more details to follow as more clarity comes through from the program about how upgrades are going to work, and in particular using those system-wide upgrades, whether you need to in fact purchase a premium economy ticket to be able to upgrade to business class, or whether those system-wide upgrades are still going to upgrade you from economy all the way up to business class, even though there's a new class in between. So more details on that to follow, but the date is April 2nd, and it'll be interesting to see how that product does for American Airlines. Last, We have a quick note about the plastic offer for paying rent and mortgage. We talked about this a couple of episodes ago. And again, I'll drop the full post in the show notes so you guys can take a look. But plastic allows you to pay your rent or mortgage for around a 2% fee. Not a great deal for just earning points in general. However, if you're working on a minimum spend requirement, it can be a great deal. And the new update here is that plastic is actually marked as a small business for the purpose of American Express's Small Business Saturday, which is now a promotion where spending at small businesses is going to be 2x points per dollar spent on all purchases with small business. So for now through the end of the year, December 31st, any rent payments that you make using plastic will earn 2 points per dollar spent. Again, not an amazing deal in terms of having to pay that 2% fee, but if you're working on a minimum spend, especially with an Amex card, this is a nice little extra boost. Okay, time to get to our featured city. All right, man. So today we're going to talk about Sao Paulo. It's one of the big cities that you and I both know pretty well, and I'm really excited to share some of the details from our personal experience there. For a little bit of background, Sao Paulo is the biggest city in the Southern Hemisphere. City proper is 11 million people and growing. And the surrounding area, the thing about Sao Paulo that's really astounding to me, and you'll notice immediately from the air when you're coming in, is that you're flying over Sao Paulo for like 25 minutes.
Yeah, it's a crazy approach. I remember doing the approach into Sao Paulo when I came to meet up with you during the World Cup. Yep. And I was on a plane with a bunch of Argentine fans, and everyone, I think a lot of people had not been to Sao Paulo before, and everyone was just gazing out the window, people reaching over, trying to look out the window from the middle seat, and people couldn't believe just the lights go on forever.
It's just buildings on and on and on forever. Huge surrounding area. And one of the things is that Sao Paulo used to be a bunch of cities, and now it's one big metropolis. And so there's actually 38 smaller municipalities or cities that make up the greater Sao Paulo area. And so in that, there's about 20 million people. And just an urban jungle. And so we're going to carve out a small piece of our experience and try and share some of the places that we've been. But this is the kind of place that I feel like, I'll probably continue to go back to over the course of my life.
There's so much to see, man. There's so much to see. And that's the thing I feel about Sao Paulo. It really doesn't matter what kind of person you are. It's such a big city that there are some people doing something that you will like, and you can find them and have a great time.
Yeah, big time culture mix in Sao Paulo as well. I mean, it's a city that, first of all, Brazil as a country has people from all over the world. It's a very diverse, multicultural kind of
Europe,
place.
Asia, Africa.
To me, like, there's not really another place in Latin America that I can get away with being a local physically, the way I look. I'm pretty pale, pretty white, have some Irish and some European descendancy, and you just can't walk around in Ecuador and look like a person that's from there. You could be from Sao Paulo easy, and you look even more Gringo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've actually had multiple Brazilians tell me when I talk about the whole gringo appearance thing, and they say, well, you never really know because Brazilians don't have a face.
Yep.
There may be some things that tip them off, like the way they wear clothes, but yeah, from very light skin to very dark skin, it's got everything in between.
It's also the largest Japanese population outside of Japan. Anyway, largest diaspora of Japanese.
I want to say that Brazil has the second most black people in the world behind Nigeria.
Wow, that's incredible. It doesn't surprise me. I know Salvador is the highest population of blacks outside of Africa, which is it's like not that big of a city. It's just like a spot that
I want to say it's pretty similar to Detroit in the makeup of the city, the racial distribution. I want to say Salvador is 80+% black.
Yep.
And the city is about 5 times the population of Detroit.
Yeah, well, Detroit's cleared out recently. It probably was on par a while back. Anyway, so we got some basics to cover, and then we're going to dive into our experience here. I guess first thing, getting to Sao Paulo, there's 3 main airports. 2 of them are pretty close to Sao Paulo. One's actually downtown. So this one does not have very many international flights, and that's Congonhas Airport, which is CGH. But if you're taking a shorter flight from inside of Brazil, that's definitely the ideal place to arrive. Second best is Guarulhos, which, depending on the weather, can be between an hour drive out of Sao Paulo, and also depending on traffic, even more importantly, can be between an hour and 3 hours to get to the airport from downtown. And then lastly is Vira Campos, which is actually the airport for Campinas, which is one of the biggest of those 38.
Have you flown out of Campinas?
I have.
Yeah, so
just
then we've done all three.
Yep, been to all three. And it's worth mentioning that there are some options. It's not the best for transit between airports, but there are a couple of options. There's actually a really good bus offering that goes from a couple of different places downtown, including Avenida Paulista, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that goes out to the Campinas airport. And that's really good because a taxi would be just preposterously expensive to get out to Campinas. So that's a really good way. And then there's also a little transit action that's going between Guarulhos and Congonhas. So Guarulhos is the international airport. That's where most of the flights from the U.S. are going to arrive, and all other international flights.
And so if you think about those two airports and what connecting them means, it means getting from north of the city, because Guarulhos is its own municipality. So it's a city north of Sao Paulo, directly north. And then so you're getting from north of Sao Paulo to the south side of Sao Paulo, because Congonhas is on the south side of the city.
Yeah, it's sort of a southwest sort of corner. And Congonhas is a really nice airport to fly out of. So if you have a chance, we're going to talk about other cities you want to visit in Brazil, especially Rio. That's a really good airport to target, and there's a lot of land and GOL flights out of both Guarulhos and Campinas, both Guarulhos and Congonhas. So lots of options. It's relatively easy to get downtown, although it can be a little bit expensive if you're coming from Guarulhos. Maybe
Uber's changed the game a little bit.
Yes,
I took an Uber from the south part of the city to Guarulhos, and I think it was 70 heads. So that's less than $25.
That's a really good deal. That's less than it was when I was there.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing you got to watch out for is traffic and weather. So if you're planning departures from Sao Paulo, number one, they don't have very good drainage, and it does rain quite a bit in Sao Paulo. And I'll never forget the time that I think it was the first trip that we were down there. The guy that was hosting us, Andre, one of his good family friends, Decio, was kind enough to give us a lift out to the airport. And he basically forced us to leave like 4 hours early. It was just like, trust me,
you never know.
If it's raining, we might show up tomorrow. So that's potentially bad news. Also, Sao Paulo is notorious for traffic jams. On average, the Friday afternoon, evening traffic jam is like 112 miles long. So you really don't want to be in a position where you're trying to go somewhere during commuting hours, which is
it's remarkable. And one thing that's really nice that I recently learned in Sao Paulo is Waze has gotten way, way better in Brazil. So you're seeing that the traffic gets cut down a little bit, but it was really interesting. I had a friend there that said their neighborhood used to be really, really, really quiet. And now there's a lot of traffic because they're underutilized roads. But when I was there, I had to rent a suit for this wedding, and I had to do that on a Friday. And so it took me about 3.5, 4 hours to go rent a suit in the same part of town I was, to go to another mall a little bit of ways away to run some errands, and to get back to my apartment.
Yeah, it can definitely be bad, which is probably part of the reason that it has the largest private fleet of helicopters of any city in the world, over 400 helicopters that are there to take folks that have the means.
One of those 26 billionaires that reside in the city?
Yeah, I think it's second place in the world after New York for most billionaires.
I'd imagine Moscow. I think Moscow's up there too.
Moscow's third.
Okay,
Moscow's right after Sao Paulo with 24. And Mumbai is in there as well. Anyway, so pretty interesting. On the flip side of that, there are more than 2 million people living in absolute poverty in Sao Paulo. About 20% of the city's greater population lives in the favelas, which is the slums. Definitely a type of area that's much more exposed to crime, just separated, far away, not good options for public transportation.
I would say to paint a picture for people, think of favelas as rough inner city areas, but take it to another level where there's a little bit more disenfranchisement, and the police are maybe a little bit less reliable, and just the problems are a little bit bigger.
Yep. Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. And obviously, don't know personally, don't really have that experience. But I would say that Sao Paulo is a really safe city to visit if you're not trying to push the limit and go to the edge of your comfort zone and find places that are more sketchy. There's a ton of really safe, really great areas and neighborhoods. We're going to focus on a couple here that we know pretty well. The first one is Via Madalena, which is the first place that we ever visited in Brazil. We arrived, AJ and I took a trip when we were in college, our first year at university. We went down to visit our friend Andre, who was an exchange student at our high school. And we dropped into Sao Paulo got out of the airport and went straight for drinks at this
Brazilian style.
at this Brazilian place. And it was like a barbecue place, which is super common. The Brazilians call it churrasco, and it just means like basically all the different forms of meat that you could possibly put on a grill, accompanied by caipirinhas, which is a nice like margarita style liquor based. I don't even know how to explain it. So cachaça is the core liquor there.
It's a hard spirit that would be similar to rum. Yeah. And the caipirinha, all it is, it's just 3 ingredients, man. You got lime juice, you got sugar, you got cachaça, you put it on ice, and it's a magical blend of a flavor.
You got to get the mix right. The Brazilians really do know how to do it. So that's one of the areas. I think that Via Madalena is probably the best place to recommend you start your search for accommodation, especially if you only have a few days. It's relatively central. It's only maybe 10 minutes or so to get a cab to Avenida Paulista, where there's a bunch of shopping and other stuff going on. It's a great neighborhood for bars. There's a lot. It's
a walkable neighborhood, and you cannot say that for every neighborhood in Sao Paulo. You can walk to everything you could imagine and not have to worry about taking too many taxis. Actually, our friend Rick of worldpackers.com, really cool company that allows people to trade their skills for accommodation. That's where their office is, unless they've moved.
No, they're still there, at least as far as I know. Just about a 5-minute walk from the Faria Lima metro station, which is sort of equidistant from the bar area in Via Madalena from the other metro stop, Via Madalena. And it's just like a really cool neighborhood because it's a whole street of bars, and all of the side streets have a bunch of cool restaurants. There's a bunch of hostels intermixed in there, and on average, I think you're paying maybe $10 a night for
if you're doing it on a budget. São Paulo is not the cheapest city, but there are options. If you hustle, you can definitely get reasonable accommodation, and even going out for drinks, it's not too bad. It's not going to be
get those liters. So they call them litrons, which is a liter bottle of beer, and often those can be if you go to the right place, those can be as low as like $2 or maybe $3 at the most. Nice to pass around the table with your friends.
Not to jump too far off topic, I feel it's something that people should know about Sao Paulo is there's a really wide range in the type of lifestyle stuff going on. So if you want to go to a high-end place, there's really great high-end places, and you're going to pay out the ass for it. And there's also the more of the people's places where you can get the cheap beer. And you can hang out, outdoor seating and stuff. So there's really a huge range of stuff to do in Sao Paulo.
So what's your favorite beer in Sao Paulo?
In Sao Paulo, my favorite, man, I don't know. I think my favorite Brazilian beer would be Antarctica Original.
The original. That's my favorite too. And that's kind of like if you consider like the beer that everybody's drinking at the bars out and about. Now we've talked about this, I'm sure, before, but one of the reasons it all tastes so good is that they keep it stupidly cold, and so they serve the beer just basically almost frozen.
Yeah, they have unmatched standards for how cold the beer
People
must be.
People will send it back if there's not ice on the outside of the bottle. So really good, there's some cost-effective ways to go out and have fun, have some drinks with friends. But Sao Paulo is one of the few places in Brazil that also really has a thriving market for artisan beer. There's a lot of craft beer making happening in Sao Paulo, and a lot of imported craft beers from all over the place, which is cool because that's not common in Rio and other places.
No, I would say Sao Paulo is light years ahead of the rest of Brazil as far as food and dining goes.
Yeah.
They actually can do international cuisine well. In Rio, you can get Japanese, but it might not be good. In Salvador, you can get sushi, but it might not be good. In Sao Paulo, you've got everything, and like Eric said, the things that we take for granted as Americans, the craft beer, some of the more nuanced things. And Sao Paulo definitely hits the nail on the head with those things.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to talk about a couple of other neighborhoods. The other place that I've stayed quite a bit is in the neighborhood of Consolação, which is basically alongside Avenida Paulista. It's very, very close to city center. So it's much more of a business district. There's a couple of Regis offices in there.
Yeah.
A lot of the big companies are headquartered there. But it's nice because there's sort of some there's a lot of bustle right on Avenida Paulista, but there's a lot of side streets that have cool neighborhoods, cool bars, lots of apartments. So lots of people actually live near the city center, which is pretty different than, like a place like Manhattan. You feel like there's not very many, only the super rich people are living in Manhattan. And around the Paulista and city center area, there's actually a lot of reasonably affordable
I would consider a lot of middle class to upper middle class housing there.
Yep. And one street that I definitely recommend you check out if you're in that area is Rua Augusta, which is August with an A. And just like tons of bars, kind of similar to Via Maddalena, but just a different part of the city, a little bit different vibe.
One thing too, though, that we should probably get out in front of so people aren't going to judge us is it's a quasi red light district. There's a little bit of that going on in that area.
It depends on how far you go down the road.
Exactly.
If you start at Paulista, which like I said is the business district, the further you go away from Paulista, the more interesting the experience.
Well, the only reason I bring that up is because somebody was asking about my time in Sao Paulo and what I'd seen, and I told them where I was staying. I said, oh yeah, Augusta, there's all these great things to do, great nightlife and stuff, and they're like, you realize, I'm like, okay, but just to get that out there. But it really is great, and it's, so many cool places to eat and drink, and it's calm enough to walk around. There's not a bunch of traffic. Crossing the road isn't a big issue like in some other parts in Sao Paulo.
Yeah. All right, so a few things in that area to mention that are worth checking out. I think my favorite in that neighborhood is the Pacaembu Stadium, which is like a municipal football stadium.
Yeah.
That was actually our first football experience in Brazil. We went and saw a friendly match with a bunch of old guys that were retired.
Yeah, and then the young blood too, because I remember at the time Robinho was like 19 and he was supposed to be like what Neymar is today.
Yep.
But yeah, those. Another thing we should mention is Brazil, pretty cool place. So this was like a charity match, and the cost of admission was a kilo of food. Yep. So we went to the market, we bought I think a kilo of rice or beans or something. Yep. You show up, give them your kilo of food, and then you're
into the game. So at the Pacaembu Stadium is where the football museum is located. And I definitely recommend that you guys check that out too. It's super cheap. I think it's like $5 to get in. And there's some very cool history. There's also a spot where you can see your penalty kick speed, which was really fun because AJ and I both tried it, and we were with our friend Andrew, who played real soccer, played at the club level at University of Michigan.
He's legitimately really good.
Really good. So, I think I kicked it about 50 miles an hour, and he kicked it about 90 miles an hour.
Yeah. I remember everyone was surprised that the gringo put a good foot on it.
But definitely worth checking out. So that does it for the two neighborhoods that I know the best, but you recently, on this last trip, stayed in a couple of other places outside of the central city.
So most recently I was in Itaim Bibi, which would be in the southern part of the city, slightly southwestern.
By the way, way to attack that name. Man, that was smooth. That's a hard one.
That is a tricky one for the English accent to say. Pretty cool area. It's a combination of residential business stuff, but lots of good restaurants, lots of good bars. It can be walkable if you want. There's a couple of huge ass highways that you have to deal with crossing. So if you're confident crossing, I personally could walk around a little bit. Ubers are abundant there. It takes about 2 minutes to have an Uber show up and take you anywhere. Had a really good time staying there. And that would be a place I would say would be good if you aren't in complete tourist mode and if you have some things to do. And the same thing goes for another neighborhood I know is Moema, and that's pretty close. It'd be maybe not bordering, but it's about as far south as the city goes. Very residential, but it's also got a bunch of cool cafes and restaurants sprinkled around. Really chill, not a late night spot. But if you're going to be in Sao Paulo for work, or if you're an entrepreneur, that would, I'd say, be a great place where it's not too loud. It's very calm. It's actually a lot of trees. It's one of the more green neighborhoods in Sao Paulo, which is a saving grace if you get a little bit depressed by the concrete jungle.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Greenland, the one area that I really liked that's an easy trip from most places in the city is Ibirapuera Park.
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
It's also not an easy one to say, but write it down and show it to the cab driver. They'll get you there. It's a big Central Park type space in the middle of the city. Tons of bike paths, running paths. There you'll see people playing softball. There's a bunch of softball.
Yeah, it's really massive. It's the type of park where people will go there to do like cycling training, rollerblading, skateboarders, everything.
Yeah, and it's big. I mean, it's definitely a pretty spacious area. You can walk for 2 hours.
I was just gonna say you could go walk the park and it'd take a couple hours.
So that's cool. The other one, this is actually close to Via Madalena, is Batman Alley, or in local lingo, Bico de Batman, which is like Batman's lair. And it's a neighborhood that is just a constant graffiti street art project. And so the first time that we went there, I was just totally blown away because I'd never seen anything like that. And I got to go back last year, and everything had changed.
So over the course of 10 years, this massive, never-ending graffiti mural has just morphed.
Yeah, and just become, and I really wonder what the turnover there, if I went back now, if any of the things that I saw last time would still be there. Yeah. But some really cool art, and it's super easy to get to from Via Madalena. It's a 2-minute Uber ride from the bar district.
Another thing, man, a lot of as Ed put it, graffiti in the city. A lot of street art, and it's not a bunch of nonsense tagging by some jerk that just wanted to go put his mark on something. But it's remarkable art.
It's art. It's a story. It's a picture. It's something that somebody thought about for a long time and then sketched out and then went and found a wall.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense. Sao Paulo is a massive city. Brazil is a place that I think is a creative country. You see a lot of art and creativity, and music is really. People really are into that there, so it's kind of the perfect storm for great street art.
And it's actually something that I recently learned was sort of a cultural transfer from New York. In that the rap music scene in New York, the hip hop scene, they had a DJ, an MC, and breakdancer, and graffiti artist, and those were the 4 components to hip hop. And Brazil took that and took it even further. And so I think that's part of the culture of the street art in Brazil. Is it's really closely tied to the hip hop movement. And by the way, that's kind of an underground thing. I don't have any good recommendations to make about specific places, but definitely talk to people at your hostel, make some local friends, because if you're into, some sort of more alternative music scene, there are a ton of underground type events that, aren't advertised, but are just there and the locals know where they are, that are super cool, where you can go hear a bunch of artists that you've never heard of before perform. And it's a pretty cool atmosphere for that. Okay, so I want to cover a couple other things. A lot of times, folks are probably going to be visiting Sao Paulo from abroad, from the U.S. or other countries, and there's a ton of great things to offer in Brazil. So we should talk for a second about next steps after you spend a few days in Sao Paulo. There's some pretty cool options. Number one, Sao Paulo's interior by maybe a 3-hour drive or so. But there's some beaches that are not the most beautiful.
And one thing too we should point out is like many places, Sao Paulo is a city and Sao Paulo is a state.
Yes.
So you need to make sure, people talk about the beach in Sao Paulo, they're talking about the beaches in the state of Sao Paulo.
Yeah. Just like New York, and Rio. Yep. So I would say the beach that we actually got to experience wasn't the nicest, because it was kind of a bigger population center too. What was that place?
Guarujá
was the beach that we went to. But there are some really nice beaches in the state of Sao Paulo, and some places that are worth checking out. And
Neymar has a house on the beach in Guarujá.
Really?
Yeah.
That's incredible. I did not.
Yeah, because I think he's from Campos, and not from Campos, from
Santos,
and Santos isn't that far. So Neymar.
Okay, right on.
That's where Neymar hangs out.
So transportation-wise, the bus station in Sao Paulo is actually really convenient. If you're trying to catch a bus to another place in the state of Sao Paulo, or even to Rio, you can take the metro. It's connected to all the metro lines, and so you go to what is the bus station called?
I forget.
Chiete?
It's massive.
Yes, it's huge, and quite stressful to buy a bus ticket if you're in a hurry. But it's like a really simple process. So I would highly encourage, if you're going from Sao Paulo to Rio, we're going to talk in a second, there's great flight options with miles if there's availability. But it's only like a 6-hour bus ride. Yep. It's overnight. Really nice culture of bus transportation in Brazil in general. The first class, like the really nice full recliner seat is like maybe $20 or something like that. Yeah,
and I would say, depending on how much you like or don't like flying, it's it's much more comfortable than flying economy on any of the airlines that would service between Sao Paulo and Rio.
The one thing to be aware of, they'll tell you it's 5.5 or 6 hours. It's probably going to be 8 because they'll stop 3 or 4 times.
And depending on when you leave in traffic.
Yep. But most of the bus rides are overnight, which is really nice to wake up, assuming you can sleep, and it's pretty easy to sleep. It's nice you go take off at around midnight. And
if you're really balling on a budget, brilliant way to skip out on a night of paying for accommodations.
It's true. And I guarantee you I've done that multiple times, have made that decision. The only advice I have for you guys for buses, if you do that, is bring lots of warm clothes. Don't put everything under the bus because they crank up the air conditioning. It's so cold on the bus. Okay, so you can get to Rio in a few hours by bus. 5 or 6 is the typical, but it could take 7 or 8. And then to fly, as we said before, Congonhas, which is CGH, is the central airport. That's going to be like a 15-minute
It's going to be the cheapest and easiest airport to get to if you're staying in Sao Paulo.
Also has a really nice Priority Pass Select lounge. So if you have one of the premium cards that has Priority Pass access, the lounge is really nice, much better than any of the domestic lounges out of Guarulhos Airport. And to book tickets, by the way, often flights between Rio and Sao Paulo, which is one of the busiest air routes in the world, are actually very cheap. Often you can find something for $50 or $60, maybe $100 worst case scenario. However, there are some great deals with miles. If you're seeing tickets over $80, you want to take a look at Etihad Guest, which partners with GOL. It's less than 500 miles between Sao Paulo and Rio. I think it's about 270 miles. And so that's going to cost 3,000 Etihad Guest miles. Etihad is transfer partners with American Express and with Citibank. So both of those you can use to top it up. They are not instant, so it does take a little bit of time, usually about 24 hours for those miles to post. And then there's also British Airways, which partners with TAM. So you've got options for TAM flights, and those will be 4,500. Obvious points. So great options for that short. It's about a 45-minute, maybe 55-minute flight from Sao Paulo to Rio. And gives you a chance to check out another world-class city in Brazil. Yeah,
one thing too. I mean, if somebody's got a choice, you want to fly to downtown in Rio if you could.
Yes, definitely. I would certainly recommend. I mean, you're just giving up maybe 2 hours to get downtown, coming from Guarulhos to get downtown, and maybe I don't know what you say about $25 to $30 if you get an Uber.
Yeah, I mean, from Sao Paulo, my Uber was less than $25, but flying into Rio, the downtown airport, right in Botafogo.
Yeah. Okay, I was talking about. Yep, that makes a ton of sense. So in Rio, the airport outside of the city is Galeão, and that's GIG. That's where most of the flights from the U.S. are going to arrive, and from other international long haul. And that's probably like an hour ride into Rio.
Yeah, depending on the traffic. If traffic's not horrible, I could see it being maybe 40 minutes. But
it can be shorter. And they've now got some better transportation options. There's a bus called the Royal.
The Blue Bus.
The Blue Bus,
big Blue Bus.
Is a good bet. It's right outside of the terminal after you pick up your baggage. Super easy to find, and it's just a flat rate. That said, if you're traveling in a group of 3 people or more, it's probably better to just get a cab. So if you're splitting the fare, it doesn't make sense to have everybody jumping on the bus. But I think that pretty much wraps it up. You got anything else to share about Sao Paulo?
I'm trying to think if there's anything. Man, it went by so quick. I got in on Thursday night and headed out kind of Tuesday morning. But man, the one thing about Sao Paulo is every time I go back to the city, there's more of the city that I want to see, and I like the city that much more. And this has happened every single time since my first time back in 2005. And I want to say now I've been to Sao Paulo maybe 6 times now. And each time I like the city more, and each time I want to know more about the city. Each time it's been a little bit of a different situation. And I've noticed that the city has changed too, for being such a big ass city, man. It's a city that's always changing and evolving, always new things happening.
Well, if you do decide to make a trip to Sao Paulo, drop us a line. Maybe one of us will be there. We definitely have been checking in at least twice a year for the last few years. So I think I'll be back in Sao Paulo at least briefly sometime in the next month or so, probably towards the end of November. I hope you guys got some value out of this. We'd love to hear your questions and feedback. And if everybody liked this segment, we got a few other cities that we definitely have that are overdue.
Yeah, we've been keeping some bullets in the chamber on some of the places we've been. There's some places we've spent quite a bit of time collectively, and we haven't really shared anything.
Well, we're still overdue on Medellin as well. We'll have to do that on another date as well. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you so much again for being with us. Show notes are at abroaders.com/SP for Sao Paulo, and we will see you next week.
Hey, Broaders, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear